Senior Vice President of Hospitality for the LA and Orange County Audio Society. And I've been given the honor of producing room tuning tips by Anthony Grimani. A little bio on Anthony. He's a veteran of Dolby Labs and Lucasfilm T.H.E. He played a major role in developing many of the standards for home theater over the last 30 years. He founded PMI Engineering in 1999 and MSR Acoustics in 2003, where he's assembled an experienced team in the fields of acoustics, physics, architecture, mechanical engineering, and construction. PMI's design work has won many awards and is featured in Home Theater Magazine, Residential Systems, and others. PMI conducts training workshops and seminars worldwide about home theater acoustics and calibration. Anthony has calibrated more than 450 listening rooms and theaters worldwide and is widely regarded as one of the world's leading experts in audio acoustics. Anthony has asked to please save your questions until the end of the lecture. It's a 1-hour lecture, and then there'll be a 30 minutes of Q&A afterwards. And if any of you happen to have brought pictures of your room, Anthony is happy to take a look at those pictures and suggest ways to improve your listening experience. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Anthony Grimani. Thank you. Thank you, John Williams. It's always an honor to be introduced by the illustrious John Williams. Illustrious he is. All right, so I actually have about a 12-hour lecture compressed down into one. And I'm going to do that by talking really fast and by cutting out a whole bunch of material. Just rely on an extra half hour at the end to do Q&A and just connect more with you guys. So I do like to ask questions. Hello, come on in. You're welcome. We usually don't bite. So how many of you guys have actually seen this last year? I did the same, well, more or less the same presentation last year, and you came back.
Yeah. Hoping it would be different.
Sorry.
No. Last year you were supposed to repeat it, and everybody liked it so much the first hour.
Yeah.
Do you remember you continued on?
I just kept on going, yeah.
And then for the second day?
Yeah.
It was like a continuation as opposed to repeating it,
Yeah. So year by year, it's funny, I've been presenting something like this for the last 20 years, more or less, and every time it changes a little bit. Mood of the moment, new data, whatever. So some of the slides you're going to see are different. It's largely the same context, which is you got to worry about the room. The room has an impact. So ultimately, we're not here to talk about room tuning for the sake of room tuning. We're here to talk about it because we want better sound, right? That's what we're interested in, is better sound. We're not interested in spending time tuning rooms instead of washing dishes or mowing the lawn. We're ultimately looking to improve our sound. And there's a lot of different ways to improve sound, including better speakers, better amps, better cables, better program material. And then, in my view, I've found over the years that the room plays a much bigger role on what is going to hit your ears and your brain than most people realize, which is why I stopped being an electrical engineer designing electronics, and I started to be an acoustical engineer designing rooms, room acoustics, and acoustical solutions. So, I formed a company 10 years ago called MSR, it stands for Media Specialty Resources, and it is actually an association with a partner called Keith Olson. Keith Olson is a very famous Grammy Award-winning recording engineer and producer. He's recorded hundreds of top-selling albums, 6 of which were good enough that people gave him that little cute statuette that said, "You got a Grammy." I've been doing this audio thing for a while. I was actually lucky enough right out of college to get a position at Dolby Labs. I worked there for 5 years, originally hired to design microchips for noise reduction for cassette decks. Remember those? And those of you who were sitting, by the way, through the presentation before me, professional analog tape is not 12-bit resolution. That's what was said before. Were you guys here? It was the equivalent of that. Let me just be clear that 15 inches per second, quarter-inch or half-inch tape, mastering tape, running on 15 IPS with Dolby SR, very good noise reduction system, has a dynamic range of about 110 to 120 dB, which is close to 24 bits. Okay, so Now, it's a very different dynamic range than what happens in digital. It doesn't clip the same way, it doesn't noise floor the same way, but cassette tape has about 12 dB worth of, 12 bits worth of dynamic range, true. But professional analog recording could be stellar if you knew how to do it, and it takes some skill. Anyway, so I spent a bunch of time at Dolby working on tape, then got into surround sound. I'm very involved in developing Dolby Surround. And after 5 years of being there, I was recruited by T.H.E to go start Home T.H.E, which was about expanding the field from just worrying about the encoding and decoding of surround sound, and actually worrying about the room, the speakers, the acoustics, all of the things that ultimately matter to get to the right experience. And then I left T.H.E 15 years ago to start a consulting company that focuses on acoustics and engineering, and along the way developed a number of acoustical products for home cinemas and listening rooms. And there's a line called Dimension 4 that we're promoting here, which is, I'll talk about a little bit later. All right, this, we've talked about all this stuff. I do have a degree in electrical engineering at UC Davis. And did this, did that, did these other things. I do a lot of teaching, I influence people, blah, blah, blah. What it doesn't say actually in here, and I think is relevant, is that I actually grew up in a family, in a musical family. My mom was a professional opera singer, so she made her living. My dad was an electrical engineer, audiophile. So this has kind of been, I look young, a little older than I look thanks to, nice hair. But I've actually been around this stuff for a while. And along the way, I played a lot of music. I actually had a decision point in my career whether to go as a professional musician or continue with engineering. So I don't come at this stuff from just a technocratic point of view with numbers. I come at it from music. And that's important. I love music, I play music, and everything I do is about making sure that it plays back correctly. All right, enough about that. Who are you guys? How many in this room are two-channel, high-quality music enthusiasts? Okay, most of you.
And multi-channel.
And how many of you? Well, it's not always the same. Who is into multi-channel music? Okay, it keeps getting better.
Any of us are into both.
So some of you guys have been lucky enough to hear how good multi-channel music can be if it's properly recorded and properly played back. Some of it sucks, and some of it's really good. How many of you are home cinema enthusiasts, home theaters? Okay, I got a good spread. How many of you guys here are dealers of audio, video equipment? How many of you are dealers of automobiles? Yeah, no car dealers. All right. Any reps in the room? You're a rep here?
Asia.
Asia? What country? Singapore. Singapore. I was just there about a month ago. Beautiful, beautiful place. Lots of really nice. There's an entire building dedicated to audio. You just go into it's called the Dolby, and everywhere you look, it's like a trade show every day, all the time. Beautiful. Is that where you are, or somewhere else? Any architects or interior designers in the room? Okay. Any builder? Anybody who builds homes for a living? You are. That's your career, your profession. Are you here as an audiophile, or is he here as a builder? As an audio. But you happen to also be a builder. Great. Anybody else in the room that I forgot that is relevant that I should be thinking about when I'm talking, so I don't insult anybody? No? All right, okay, cool. So we're here to talk about acoustics, and why are we here to talk about acoustics? Simply because they are very audible. I like to think that they contribute 50% of the sound quality you're hearing and interpreting, which means that if you don't worry about the acoustics of a room, you're only hearing half of the quality you can get out of an AV system, an audio system, a speaker, whatever it is. So the cool thing is acoustics are fixable. A lot of people I run into are sitting in a room that's noisy, echoey, and in which the overall tonal or temporal response is horrible. You go, well, it's just the room I have. It's like, well, you can fix it. Just because you have a bald tire in your car doesn't mean you have to keep driving with it. You go to the store, get a new tire, right? What's my excuse? I don't know. I don't have time. Okay, so the elements of acoustics that we're going to talk about over here is, acoustics is a very broad field, by the way. It covers all kinds of different areas. Specifically, the ones we're going to talk about here are room sound reflections from walls, ceilings, floors. We're going to talk about echoes, reverberation time, and standing waves, and caution. This will get technical. So, I like to introduce this by starting with a concept that I call the acoustic interface, and then by taking my jacket off because I'm going to get serious. So, we all know the term interfaces, right? Interconnects, whatever, things that connect pieces of gear together, and in that field we have a lot of fantastic companies here represented that in the case of an AV system, you may have a source device plugged into a preamp / decoder, plugged into an equalizer, plugged into power amps, and all of these pieces of equipment are fantastic today, and there's great interconnects today, and what we have coming out of the power amp is beautiful signal. And you're going to take this beautiful signal, perceived signal, plug it into a loudspeaker, and it's going to spray some sound into the room, which is generally out of control. Some of that sound is going to go to the listening position, some of it's going to be bouncing around the room, and until you actually look at what's bouncing out around the room and pay attention to it, you have sound that's potentially polluted. Potentially. Sometimes the walls help, most times they get in the way. So, let's look at this acoustic interface in a little more depth. Imagine a sound going from a speaker to a listening position, seen from above, and that sound has a tonality that's very round. And I think an example would be a bell tone, a tubular bell, something goes boom, has an impulse, has a nice tail to it. The direct sound from a good speaker to a listening position is going to be clean. And for quite a moderate price today, you can get a very good loudspeaker. And what I mean by good is it's very linear. The sound you put into it will come out very linearly. More expensive speakers may play louder, may have more beautiful cabinetry. You know, a real piece of news for you guys. Anybody make speakers in this room? I didn't ask any manufacturers. Okay. When you're spending a lot of money on a beautiful speaker, probably 2/3 of the money is going into the finish of the speaker. That has nothing to do with the sound quality, it has to do with how beautiful the thing is. By the same token, a top-of-the-line piano has a beautiful lacquer finish on it. It doesn't change the tone of the piano, it just makes it look beautiful. So, at a moderate price, you can get a speaker today that sends a direct sound into the room that's very good. Maybe the speaker doesn't look beautiful, but it's very good. Now, any decent speaker today, built in the realm of audio, hi-fi, is going to have a coverage in which the sound is about the same over an angle of plus and minus 60 to 80 degrees. Some speakers have a wider dispersion, some have a narrower, but most speakers have a sound on axis that's at least identical up to 30 degrees, usually pretty good up to 45 degrees, and out to about 60 degrees, decent up to decently at the upper mid-range is the same as the direct sound, same level, same response. So some sound's going to go to you, and some sound's going to bounce off the right wall. And that same sound bouncing off the right wall takes a little bit longer to get back to you, so you hear this bell impulse twice. And you end up with a little clouding of the sound. It goes boom, 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 boom. Now, that's not actually what it sounds like in a room, right? It actually still sounds like a bell tone. And the way it gets there is your ear-brain system pays attention to the direct sound, localizes the off-axis reflected sound because it's coming out later, and actually does an echo cancellation trick on it. It actually goes, I will ignore that. Meanwhile, what's going into your eardrums is polluted. Your brain is actually scrubbing it clean. Now, it can scrub off a single reflection pretty well. It can scrub off a second reflection pretty well. And then as you start to add more and more reflections, it gets more and more difficult for the brain to clean up the mess that is really going on that's really going into your eardrums. So this is what's going into your ears. You're still hearing it as a nice round tone, and the more reflections there are in the room, the more it gets polluted, and the harder it is for your brain to accept that you're hearing a good clean sound. I'm showing you a single loudspeaker. When you have 2, your brain has to work twice as hard. When you have 7, as in a multi-channel audio system, playing music or film, and a bunch of you guys said you like that, now your brain gets into overload. It's like, dude, I can't do it. Overload could lead to just hearing bad sound. And I don't know, I like to ask how many of you guys like multi-channel music, and a lot of people go, The fact is, I've heard some really well-recorded program material played back in rooms of core acoustic control where the sound is just bad. You just sit there and you go, oh God, this is weird. What's really going on is what's squirting out of the speakers is very good, but but there are so many reflection points in the room that your brain just goes, dude, I can't deal. So now what you're actually hearing is what a single omnidirectional microphone would pick up if you stuck it in the middle of the room. So if you took a little recorder, a microphone, your iPhone, and stuck it there and recorded that sound, you kind of know what that's going to sound like, right? Everybody's recorded a conversation across a conference table, right? What does that sound like? Clean? Echoey? Echoey. But meanwhile, when you're listening to the person talk, it's all clean, right? What's going on? You and the person and your two ears, hopefully both ears work, and your brain hopefully works, are canceling out the echoes, the microphone's not. Right? That sounds bad. Same thing as when somebody's talking on a speakerphone, you know, when they're just deciding to not get on the horn but actually have you on speakerphone, you know what that sounds like. That's actually what's going into your ears all the time. Right now, as I'm speaking, I probably sound pretty clear, right? But what's going into your ears is an echoey sound, your brain's canceling it out. You want proof? By the way, I could stand up here and say complete bullshit for the next hour. And what would you know? I would still get my free cocktail. I get a cocktail at the end of this, right? I get my full service. Full service. I still get my hour of soapbox, and I still get my free cocktail at the end, right? So I'd rather try to prove it to you. And a very simple proof of this is it is through binaural hearing that your brain, by comparing what's going on with your ears and comparing the first sound, it takes 2 years to do this. If you plug one ear, you will actually hear what I'm talking about. You guys want to hear that? So plug one ear. I don't care, left or right, doesn't really matter. I'll keep talking. Now listen to the sound of my voice in this echoey space. Listen to how echoey it is, right? Does the sound of my voice change when you listen to one ear? Now listen to me again with binaural hearing. Is it now clearer? Yes? It works.
We hear the room with one ear, and with both ears, I'm canceling the room and hearing you.
Correct. So I can stop here, I can go get a cocktail, because that's the most important thing I want you guys to realize. Is you go into a room, any one of the rooms here, your listening room, your friend's listening room, your girlfriend's listening room, whoever, it doesn't matter. And what's actually going into your ear canal, your eardrum, and then up to your ear, your brain, is echoed sound, reverberated sound that's polluted by the room, and then your brain has to go to untangle it.
So you're telling us, is it okay?
Are you questioning me, or are you interacting?
No, I'm amplifying. So
okay.
What I just learned was if I want to hear the room, because I'm trying to work on my room,
yep,
plug up an ear, because you hear it a lot better.
Excellent. And what I recommend is rather than your finger, get an earplug.
No, the finger's working.
The finger works fine, I know, but after a while,
it's rather amazing.
It does work. Actually, interestingly enough, the finger, because of the vibration of your arm, puts a little, if you listen long enough, puts a little right there. So get a really good earplug, stick it in the ear, and listen, walk around the room, and you'll hear shit you had, excuse me, you won't hear shit. No, actually, it's shit. It's stuff you don't want to be hearing. You hear stuff that is a problem. Meanwhile, everybody has adapted to just listening to speakers in rooms and tolerating it. Up until there's enough speakers and enough wall reflections to where it just starts to sound bad. And that's one of the challenges with multi-channel sound is multiple loudspeakers in rooms that are too echoey just end up being a mess to your brain. So, we got to control this. We got to do something about it, right? So, let's look at this a little bit further. This is now a room with 7 loudspeakers, seen from the top. And the 7 loudspeakers are left, center, right, side left, back right. This is sort of the current state of the art. We're about to go to a sea change where there's more speakers placed up over here and everywhere to create even more resolution in the spherical capacity around us. Whether or not you think that's necessary, whatever, it's happening. So we have a direct sound. In this case, I'm showing it coming out of the center speaker if you're listening to either film material or properly recorded multi-channel music, by the way. There's a big split in production theories on how to use multi-channel. There's people who don't use the center at all, and there's people who use it. I'm a fan of using the center for lots of good reasons. But
there's some early stereo recordings that were 3 channels of recording that.
Right. And stereo, by the way, is not 2-channel. So there's actually that thing I just said. It's like one of those pieces of knowledge which, added with $5, will buy you a beer at the local club. But stereo does not mean 2-channel. The word stereo comes from the Greek stereos, which means strong by association with a group, similar to a group. Stereotypical, you guys ever heard of that? So the term stereophonic sound was coined by Bloomline in the 30s to represent sound that was stereotypical of real life sound. And what he found is that in order to reproduce sound that was real life-like, is it took 3 speakers across the front and at least an array of 2 speakers somewhere over there in the room to reproduce that. And the first implementations of that were in the film business, right? Now, our industry took that big word of stereophonic sound and turned it into 2 channels. It sounds pretty good, but really stereo sound should be 3 or 4 or 5 channels. Okay? Now, I'm going to show you an example of a center speaker playing music or playing dialogue or playing whatever. There's a direct sound to the listener, and then there's a reflection from a sound that just happens to pass your listening position. So there's a direct sound that hits you, and then the sound that just fails to hit your ear, and it goes over that way. And by the way, that sound is just the off-axis sound of any good hi-fi speaker, right? Remember that a decently designed speaker is going to have coverage of at least from here to here, at least 90 degrees, if not 120 degrees, pretty constantly. So the sound that comes out of the speaker and goes directly to you is registered by your eardrums, goes into your brain. Then there's the sound that goes over that way, passes you, hits the back wall, hits the front wall, hits the side wall, goes back around, and comes back to you about 50 milliseconds later. Long time. It's quite attenuated by the extra distance it takes to get there, and at every bounce it loses some energy, but it's still coming back to your ear probably about 12 to 15 dB down from the original sound. Another sound that is another 10 degrees off axis bounces around like this, you know, back wall, right wall, front wall. So this is 10 degrees off axis, 20, let's look at 30, bounces around over there, hits you, 40, bounces around, hits there, etc., 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 etc. And you've got a whole bunch of sound reflections that are all adding up from the right side of this room to a whole bunch of red lines, red arrows. There's this reflection that's often known as the first reflection, the one that hits one bounce and comes back. It's pretty loud. It's only about 2 or 3 dB down from the direct sound. But all these reflections come around and add up to a sound field that's around you. I'm only looking at one half of the room right now. If you look at the left half, you get twice as many reflections. And ultimately, what you're hearing in a typical room without any control of the acoustics is a direct sound, and then a whole bunch of reflected sounds shown in red here, all of which add up to an energy that's 2 or 3 times louder than the direct sound. The net energy of the reflected sound is 2 or 3 times louder than the direct sound. Did you know that? Is that crazy? Sorry? Why is that? Because there's only one vector hitting you and about 1 million vectors going everywhere else. The net energy returned by the room is much more. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to prove that and show that, and I'll get to those in a second. But the reality is all of this means that are you listening to the speaker or are you listening to the speaker plus the room? Who thinks you're listening to the speaker only? Right? At this point you realize that would be a dumb statement to make. You're listening to the speaker plus the room? Okay. If you don't take control of the room, if you don't consider the room as part of your interface, what are you doing? God only knows what you're doing. What you're doing is randomness. It may sound good, it may not sound good. You had a question.
Actually, I was just more thinking to myself, that's just one speaker, that's not all seven.
It's only one speaker. Good point. And so if I don't have that in this presentation, but if I actually showed you what happens off this speaker, that speaker, that speaker, you end up with a complete mess of reverberated or reflected sound in the room that ultimately leads to your brain going, I do not like this. It does not sound good. It creates listening fatigue. In most cases, after about a half hour of listening, you're like, you know what, I think I'll just go watch TV or something, because it's just not enjoyable. It doesn't matter how good the speaker is. You can have the best speaker in the world for the most amount of money, interface with the best cables. It is not enjoyable. And what you have to do to get it back to enjoyment is to take control of this. Now, I'm going to say this a number of times. Taking control of it doesn't mean getting rid of the reflections. Okay? I will not, repeat after me, I will not get rid of all the sound reflections. Thank you very much. How many of the sound reflections will you get rid of? That's what I'm going to talk about. You had a question?
Yes. Maybe ultimately this is where you're trying to take this, but my general question in exploring room treatments over the years has been that there's a variety of different kinds, from physical room traps to the T.H.E variety, which uses bowl, you know, like the acoustic arc things around the room, which I've experienced, and he's got HFTs. I have a huge Tibetan bowl at home. It's this big crystal bowl. When I roll it between my two speakers, it sounds better. Then now there's a bunch of what are, I think they're German-oriented or electronic type adjustments that you listen to what's going on in the room, and it makes the adjustments from the speaker.
I'll talk about that.
A whole variety of things, of approaches, and I don't know if they're all complementary or I think different approaches to the same thing.
There's a whole bunch of approaches, and what the way I'm building this lecture is I'm going to present you the problem, and then I'm going to present you a suggested recipe. So if you're hungry, you can eat pasta with tuna, you can eat chicken cacciatore, you can eat Tibetan salt on kale. I'm going to give you a recipe for a certain type of dish, and there's other ways to do it. I'm just going to give you the recipe that I found will satiate most people's hunger the quickest possible. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to tackle it. It all starts with understanding that the room is affecting what you're hearing, and you know, in very gross terms, half of the sound quality is the room. I've actually heard speakers that are fantastic that are so completely destroyed that 90% of the sound quality was polluted by the room. But you know, just in very quick terms, half-half. Okay. So now, I will acknowledge that I've been in rooms where, without treatment, the sound of a pair of speakers, never the sound of 7 speakers, by the way, but the sound of a pair of speakers was perfectly enjoyable in the room. It does happen, and just like it does happen that somebody wins the lottery once in a while. You know, somebody once in a while gets that ticket and wins $10 million. Woohoo! And also, it's known that if you put enough violins into the hands of enough monkeys and wait long enough, they will play 3 bars of Beethoven's Fifth, completely by accident. It will happen. So there's an element of randomness that leads to the fact that you can have a condition where the direct sound of the speaker and the reflections from the room and where they come from and how they all add up at your seat position produce a complementary process. It can happen. It's just very low probability. It takes a lot of tweaking to get there. And when you're talking about multi-channel sound, it's virtually impossible to get all 7 speakers to accidentally play Beethoven's Fifth perfectly from beginning to end. So, most often what you get, if you actually looked at what's called the impulse character of the sound, which is acousticians like to look at what's called the impulse response, and it's actually not measured with an impulse today. It's actually measured with a sine wave and then back integrated into what's looking like an impulse. But think of it a different way. Imagine I actually clap my hand in the room, which is an impulse. There's a direct sound that goes to your ear, and then there's a reflection here, and a reflection there, reflection there, reflection there. And if you could look at those in time, you actually had a device that went boop. I measure here the hand clap. Oh, there's another one coming from somewhere else. Oh, there's another one coming from somewhere else. This is what a typical room would look like. You would have the direct sound from my hands to your ear. Typically take whatever time of flight, 10 milliseconds if it's 10 feet away. And then there's a gap, and then there's some reflections. It could be the ceiling and floor or the left and right walls. Then there's a gap, and then there's reflections that take 2 or 3 bounces, 4 bounces, 5 bounces, 6 bounces. Eventually, these reflections here, the ones that are very late, are the ones that took, you know, that 10-degree off axis. If you remember, I had to bounce off the back wall here, and come back quite late. So, in a bad room, what you get is these clustering of reflections, in which instead of having a nice even decay, you actually end up with these slaps, like somebody going bam, 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 bam. That's bad. That means bad sound. Because when you have this, your ear brain is always acting as a radar going, what's that? What's this? What's this? I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And all of the speakers in the room squirting all of those sounds and those reflections just creates anxiety in your brain and fatigue and lack of enjoyment. So this is what happens most of the time as presented in an impulse response. Very, very loud reflections and clustering, sometimes by bad luck. The reflection that bounces twice over here is matched by another one that bounces over here, another one that bounces over here. So you have these groupings where very closely together you get multiple reflections coming from different places. And that's what I'm showing, for example, over here. Over here. Bad sound. That's like sleeping on a bed that's very lumpy, not smooth. I'll show you later what good sound is. All right. Now, I talked about this before. Remember that in the perception of a sound field, the direct sound does dominate. So even though there's all these reflections, because of your 2 ears in your brain, you still go, oh, the speakers are over here. There are walls, there's reflections, there's a marble floor, but I still hear the sound from the speakers, all is good, right? That is done because we focus on the first arriving sound. There's a process in our brain that's often known in acoustics as the Haas effect, because Dr. Haas, a German researcher, first kind of discovered it or quantified it about 100 years ago and said that, hey, if it's within this amount of time and these spectra, your brain will ignore it and all of that. And figured out that if it's less than 30 milliseconds in time, you'll integrate it and ignore it, all of that. But remember, it takes brain power and it's fatiguing. And like you said, if you want to convince yourself or anybody else that this is important, stick an earplug or your finger in one ear and listen to the room. You'll hear what's really going on into your eardrum. Okay? So, direct sound dominates, and it gets in the way of realizing how bad things are. Here's a demo I love to do for people when they don't quite get this. And it's really good in a room this size. Imagine I was actually showing you the Bodo Sonic 2000 speaker, big beautiful $10,000 speaker a piece up here, without any acoustical treatments, and I want you to buy them, they sound great. If I stood in front of the speaker in this room, let's say you were sitting in a chair over here, you would hear a good sound stage, right, if it was a good speaker? And that good sound stage means that there would be some sounds in the middle of the room, some sounds to the left, some sounds to the right, some sounds really wide, correct? We all agree that sound stage and imaging. The singer, let's say Diana Krall, who we have over here on an acoustic panel, is singing here. And you can see her. The speakers are so good you can actually see her singing here, right? In a room this size, without any acoustical treatments, I can stand in front of the right speaker and the image won't change. You won't even know I'm standing in front of the speaker. Anybody ever had that experience?
With a good speaker or a good treated room?
In an untreated room with a good speaker, if I actually, I should do this on one of these lectures to prove that I'm not bullshitting, and actually put up a pair of speakers, have a few people sit over here and go, I am now standing in front of the right speaker. Do you hear any change? People go, no. Are you transparent? I'm very transparent. What's going on when that happens? When I'm actually in the way of the direct path, and there's no change to the perceived sound field or sound quality. What's actually going on?
The majority of the sound is reflected sound.
The majority of the sound is reflected. Hi, how are you? I'm glad you made it. We're talking about acoustics. It's really fun. Okay. You got it. There's so much sound going into our ears from the reflections that the direct sound is very subdominant. It's a very small portion of what you're hearing. So when I block the direct sound, it don't matter. Isn't that terrible? I'm getting in the way of what you should be hearing and you don't hear any difference. It's bad. So when you walk around the show, if you go, especially if you go in one of the larger rooms, you can try this. Actually have somebody stand in front of the right speaker, left speaker, and listen to how much of the room you're listening to versus the speaker. And then I don't know.
You know, I've always preferred listening at the equilateral triangle position, which is much closer to the speakers.
Yeah.
And I never knew why until just now. You've explained it, because I have emphasized the direct sound versus the reflected sound. Thank you, Dr. Bose.
Indeed.
Omar.
Amar Bose. You ever hear the joke of Paul Cliff and Amar Bose running into each other after a CES show at the time? And it goes like this. So Paul Cliff goes, hey, Amar! They were across the airport from each other. Hey, Amar, how was your trade show? And Amar Bose goes, not bad, how about yours?
So you're in agreement. There's a point to sitting closer to the speakers when you have a less than ideal room.
There is. Let me give you a little statistic. In a typical room, like say a 20-foot by 16-foot by 9-foot room, which is actually Research says that that's the average room that people listen to. There's actually an IEC standard for the average listening room around Western Europe and the USA. 21 by 16 by 9. That represents the average. In a room like that, what's called a critical distance, which is the place at which the direct sound and the reflected sound are equal, right? So when you get closer to the speaker, you're hearing more of the direct sound. You're hearing the same amount of reflected sound. That does not change as you move around the room. But as you get closer to the speaker, you have more direct sound. There's a place where you switch from one to the other, called critical distance in acoustics. Anybody know how far that is from the speaker?
6 or 8 feet.
6 feet. How do you know that?
Put it together a few times.
He's put very good. So at 6 feet from the speaker in a typical living room, I'm not even saying an untreated room, I'm talking about a room that may have carpeting, may have some drapes, may have some furniture, some might even suit totally live. At 6 feet away from the speaker, which is this distance from the speaker, really close, is when you're switching from hearing mainly direct sound to now you're hearing a ratio where it's more reflected sound.
So if we
So
just
that's-
move our chair a couple of feet closer to the speakers tonight and properly retow the speakers and so forth, we'll improve the sound before we even begin with the room.
You can freely improve the sound.
You're saying reflected sound improves it, or you do it just before you start getting excess reflected sound?
Okay, so now we get into the how much reflected sound do you want, and that's the rest of my presentation. You want some reflected sound. You don't want to kill it all.
So
So
the 6 foot point is the point where you, what?
I'm just saying that at 6 feet is the point at which the direct energy from the speaker to your ear is the same as the reflected energy in the room, which may or may not be a good place to sit. Now, recording engineers have gotten used to sitting at critical distance without knowing it. You go to most studios, and they're sitting 4 to 6 feet away from their speakers, mainly because they want to hear direct feel.
How about the separation between the speakers?
They're typically at 50 to 60 degrees, so same angle. Just everything has gotten closer. But they're trying to hear more direct feel because they're listening for little things in the soundtrack. And by the way, sometimes obsess over stuff that you're never going to hear at home. And when I design recording studios, I actually try to peel those guys further away from the speakers. I'm like, but I want to be the direct feel. It's like, why would you want to listen in a condition that's so different to your final target audience? What do you mean? And then I have to explain, well, why don't you just listen in a good room the same way as your listeners are hearing? So then you don't have to keep checking the tracks in somebody's living room and here and there. That's just too difficult for them to get. So, I like to think of reflections as distortion. Some distortion's good, some distortion's bad. We've all learned in audio that there are some harmonic distortions that are a problem and some that are not a problem. But clearly a reflection results in distorting the sound. It changes the sound. How much does it change the sound, and is that audible? Anybody know? Is it very audible? Is it not audible? Very audible. You guys want a little demo? Do you want me to stop talking for a minute and actually give you a demo?
Sure. Yeah.
What would I do if you said no? I would just keep talking. So, my demo is a very, very high quality demo. You'll be impressed by this. It involves a Bluetooth speaker. And it involves my Samsung phone that's actually going to play, it's actually a PCM track of a band I like called Pink Noise. And they had many hits in the 70s, including Dark Side of the Room. And Wish You Could Hear. This one. And if I'm lucky, this will actually work. It worked. I was amazed when this comes together. Okay. So, this is a piece of program material. So this is pink noise. You guys know what pink noise is? It's random signals that cover the entire frequency range from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, all at the same energy level. It sounds like rushing water, but it's just exciting basically all the energy bands. Of course, this speaker can only play from about 180 or 200 hertz up to 4 kilohertz, so it's only the middle of that. So imagine what this would be if I had a really good speaker. And I'm going to try this a few different ways. First, I'm going to use just this table as a reflective surface and see if we can actually hear what this table is going to do to the sound, and see if you guys can hear that. If you can't, I'll try something different. So, this is pink noise, and this is pink noise with a sound reflection. I feel like we have stereo wars going on here.
Oh yeah, right there, about 6 inches away, you start to hear a reinforcement of some of the lower frequencies. There it is. It's almost like another sound, a more rushing kind of sound coming in the lower mids.
Right. So there's a switch in the lower mids. This thing that kind of goes.
Yes.
Can you guys all hear that? Yes. Even though this is a cracker, you can hear it there. It's a big room. I've got competing things going on next door. The main thing is that what you're hearing, I'll explain in a second, is there's a direct sound, there's a reflected sound. And by moving the speaker, you're hearing the change in that reflected sound so you can hear something going on. So this reflection is changing the sound of the speaker. This is the bottom line I want you to hear. So if this speaker was up against that wall over there doing the same thing, you'd hear the same effect. Okay? Now,
so that's why speakers sound better out in the room and not against the wall.
The closer they are to the wall, the more they have this reflection process to them, and the more polluted the sound ends up being. So what is actually going on here is interesting. Technically speaking, it's called, what you're actually hearing here is comb filtering. And the question is, can you hear them? I've actually sat through some presentations from some acousticians that go, you can't hear comb filters. And it's like, you can't hear this? What are you talking about? I hear this. What they mean is if it's stationary. If I don't give you a reference, you don't know that it's wrong. I give you a reference and you can hear that it's changed. You can't hear that it's wrong now, but if I change it, you can hear that something's changed, right? So if you're used to eating salty food all the time, like people in Scandinavian countries, they have really high incidence of heart disease because they eat a lot of salty food. You don't know that it's salty. And then you like try to eat non-salty food for a while, and you go back to eating the lutefisk or whatever they like over there, and you go, oh my God, I can eat this. It's all relative. And what I'm showing you here in the middle of all this noise is you can hear comb filters. So you can hear them easily, test it with pink noise. Let me tell you what's actually going on. This is a condition that's happening here. You have a direct sound from the speaker to the listener. You have a reflection, speaker, listener, reflection off a wall, or in this case a table surface. If this was actually representing sound, after time T1, the transit time from the speaker to the listener, there's sound. After time T2, the extra time that it takes to bounce off the wall, there's a reflection. And that direct sound and that reflection are actually what goes into your ear brain after the reflections come together. In this case, those two happen to be correlated. They happen to be going up and down together. You get more sound. In a particular relationship here, shown at this frequency for this difference between the two times, you end up with a reinforcement of sound. That's a good thing, right? The reflection is giving us more sound rather than losing. Well, we got lucky here. We may as well go buy a lottery ticket. If we're not lucky, we may have a different frequency we're playing, because music is made out of lots of different frequencies, in which you have this direct sound and that reflected sound, which is the same as the direct sound, just delayed by some amount. But notice here that when this one's done being positive pressure and starts to go negative pressure, because that's what sound is air that's started stationary with no pressure to it, or atmospheric pressure, average pressure, it's being compressed and expanded, and that is going to your ear and pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling your eardrum, which is telling you there's sound, right? You realize that if there's no eardrums anywhere around an area of changing air pressure, there is no sound, right? This is the answer to the Zen question of if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear, you know that, right? Sound does actually not exist. The sound is just a perception of air pressure changing over time. And if the air pressure is changing over time in the direct field this way, and in the reflected field in the opposite way, you get a cancellation. So after the reflected period, there's a canceled sound. So if I told you that a reflection can add some sounds and cancel other ones, would you think that's a bad idea? We don't want to lose any of our sounds, right? We're buying expensive electronics, interconnecting them with very expensive cables, putting them into crazy power supply devices, and connecting them to speakers that cost $25,000 a pop. And then the room's going to eliminate some of those sounds that were so carefully linearly reproduced? I don't think so. Not a good idea. So, if you were to chart the frequencies of addition and cancellation, it would look like this. At low frequency, all the sounds add up. There's a point at which they start to cancel each other out, that point being this condition. When the frequency of the sound happens to be such that half of a wavelength corresponds to the difference in time between T1 and T2, you end up with a cancellation. When the frequency goes up, the cancellation is less bad, goes back up to an addition. Cancellation, addition, cancellation, addition. This, where this is, depends on the relationship between the speaker, the wall, and your seating position. If you get closer to the wall, or if you move the speaker closer to the wall, everything moves up in frequency. Further it moves down, closer it moves up. So this all sounds like the pitch has gone up, this pitch has gone down. There is really no change in pitch. It's just you're changing the frequencies where there's cancellation. And that's what's happening here. When I move this up and down, I was mimicking with my mouth what I'm hearing, which is it goes, right? It sounds like it's pitching up. It's not pitching up, it's pink noise. It's got all the pitches in it all the time. What's happening is that where the comb filters are changes. So, what do we do with that? Do we agree this is not tolerable? We can't be listening to sound in which we're losing some frequencies, we're adding sounds at other frequencies, we're just non-linearizing the sound, right? So what do? One thing we do is we try to absorb some of the reflections. Absorbing is the act of putting a material that's fibrous on the wall or the floor or the ceiling so as to turn actually the acoustic energy into heat. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is to scatter the sound, which is to put some material that breaks up the sound reflection so that rather than the reflection off this table or off the wall be a solid reflection, it's broken into small pieces. So when it goes back to your ear, instead of being really loud, it's broken into something that's 10 or 12 dB quieter. Which one is better?
Both of them?
Both are good. So the last 10 minutes of what I'm going to talk about over here before we break for our Q&A is how much do we use? How much is good? So now, if this reflection business is bad, why don't we just put a bunch of absorption everywhere? Why don't we just cover the entire wall with sound absorbing panels?
I dare you to stay.
Sorry?
It's awful.
It sounds awful. Anybody ever tried that? Anybody ever experienced that? It sounds bad. It sounds, it's dead. And the real problem is that if you eliminate all the reflections, thinking that reflections totally kill the sound, you get into a perception problem where humans are so used to hearing reflections that now you're contradicting that completely, which is like cutting out all of the salt out of the food. You need some salt in food. Now, we all know that salt's not good for you, right? Everybody realize that?
No.
Salt is not good for you.
Celtic sea salt is great for you.
Celtic sea salt is great. It's the. How about Tibet?
Okay, maybe also good, but maybe not quite.
Depends on the frequency.
Yeah, there you go.
You do need some salt for the food to taste good. You do need some reflections for the sound to taste good. And part of that is about not contradicting the human's expectation that there are some reflections in the room. So the whole thing is, eliminating all the reflections is a bad idea. We just have to eliminate the right amount. So, by the way, before I go too far, I wanted to show you the improvement you can get from using an absorber panel. So I'm going to do the same demo, but in this case I'm going to use Diana. Diana's great. I saw her sing the other day. She's a fantastic performer, great singer. Have you anybody ever seen her sing? Diana Krall? That's it? Do you guys, anybody ever hear Diana Krall sing? Go see
We've
her
all
sing.
heard her.
You've all heard her live.
Yeah.
No. If you look at her tour, if you can find her singing close to where you are, go hear her. She doesn't do a lot of her jazz stuff anymore. She does other stuff, but it's very entertaining. She's great. Now, Diana Krall over here was painted by Merrill J., great artist who's over here at the show, and we licensed her art and printed it with dye sublimation onto a fabric and put it onto a board of sound absorptive material. So this looks like a Diana picture. It's also a sound absorber.
What's that product called?
This is called Living Sound.
Living Sound.
Living Sound. And this particular thing is around 300 and, I think around 380 or 400 bucks. We have flyers over here. Enough for my shameless publicity stunt. I'm going to put Diana on the table over here, and we're going to see what she can do to change or not change our problem over here. So let's see. First thing I'm going to do is play this again at the table, and then I'm going to do it over here and see if that improves things at all. Okay, problem, right? Less comb filters?
Yeah.
Understand? I have no idea what you guys are hearing, so I need, you know, it
Sounded about the
did
same.
not work. Sounded the same to you?
Yeah, about the same.
Pretty close.
Sounded the same to you? Sounded the same to you?
Much softer, but not.
Much softer sound.
Yes.
Much softer. So for you it sounded the same, but for you, I'm sorry, when you say the same, do you mean there's no improvement?
Right.
Okay.
There was higher frequency.
Tag.
anyway. Yeah,
So let's
get
try
up-
with
get
a
up
bit of
moving
over.
this first.
So again, you know what? It would help a lot if I turn this off. Better. Okay, again the table.
Very simple. Takes out more high frequency.
Okay, so from here it sounds radically different. So maybe you guys need to come a little closer. So at the end, when we're done with the Q&A, I'll repeat this with everybody standing over here. I think that by the time you have all the reverb in the room, I don't know what it's doing. But you're saying it improves it or not?
It was almost much softer when you got close to the absorptive material.
Okay, it's softer. But so what I'm specifically talking about is that change in pitch, that thing that goes, that phasiness, that goes. I hear it very much here, and when I do this over here, it's much reduced.
Clean it up a little bit. Clean it up a little bit.
A little bit, okay. So at the end, I won't do it now, but if you guys want to hear it, just go cluster in the middle closer so we can hear it. Anyway, the idea is to try to reduce those comb filters. There it is. So, absorbing everything, putting panels like this all the way around a room, we all know is not a good idea, right? The analogy I actually like to say is, you've all heard of aspirin. You know that it's good for headaches. You know that we still don't really know how it improves headaches, reduces. You know that? We just know it does, but chemically we still don't understand how it works. But we all know that if you have a headache, 2 aspirin, 3 aspirin will reduce it, but an entire bottle is not a good idea, right? Somehow we know that. Who's ever told you that?
Warning label.
Warning label? Everybody knows that. But we've never sat in class in school where they said, today we're going to study aspirin, right? Somehow you know that. And by the same token, anybody who likes sound knows that you do not put absorbers all the way around the room. I don't know who told you that, but everybody seems to know it, right? So you're also hearing here today that having just all reflections is a problem. So absorbing all the reflections is bad. Not absorbing them is bad. What do we do? So live and dead end doesn't work. And I could sit here for 2 hours to talk about that. And it's actually not just my opinion, there's a lot of research that shows that. It's simpler than that. 30 years of screwing around with this stuff, talking to people, reading papers, running experiments, doing A/B comparisons, has led me to this conclusion for an acoustics recipe. All that you need in most rooms is to cover the wall surfaces with about 20% of absorptive surface. Okay? So you look at the length and height of that wall, multiply one by the other, come up with a square footage. 20% of that is the amount of absorption you need to make that wall less annoying sonically. Only 20%. More than that, you're over deadening the room. You want to distribute those evenly, and the result is you're going to lower the reflected energy. Another part of the recipe is, if you can, to improve the sound quality, you also want to put 20% of diffusive surfaces. Diffusive surfaces are those that scatter the sound around the room. They don't absorb it. You just take the sound vectors and break it into smaller pieces. And you generally want to interleave that with the absorption. So live band data, put all the absorption on one side of the room, put all the diffusion at the other side of the room, and it actually creates confusion to the typical human being, because there's no condition in regular life where that ever happens. It was a theory, it was a technocratic theory of sound field that has been shown over and over and over and over again to create more confusion than good. There's a great paper by Floyd Toole and Sean Olive presented at the AES in 2003, I don't know how I remember this, called about diffusion and confusion. And there's a whole analysis of why you don't want to put all the diffusion on one side of a room. Please feel free to read that. I like some diffusion, only 20% of the wall surfaces around the room interleaved with absorption. I also like to define diffusion in two general types. One type that I call 2D, which could be like a curved surface where the sound vector hits the material and it scatters in a 2D horizontal plane. And I like to define what's called 3D, which is a surface that's hemispherical, which when the sound hits it, it breaks into 3 dimensions. And I generally like 2D diffusers towards the front of the room and 3D diffusers towards the back of the room. What you get from this is an improved sense of spaciousness. It actually makes the room sound bigger than it really is. It tricks your ear brain into believing that a room that may be 300 square feet sounds more like 1,000 square feet. Because you're breaking the relationships between sources and diffusion, and your brain goes, must be bigger than it really is. So in this acoustics recipe, you also want to treat the ceiling. You want to make sure that that reflection that goes up in the ceiling comes back is either absorbed or diffused, and a lot of people forget that. And you want to also control the bass. So I see people out there putting absorbers that are only this thick, like 1 inch or 1.5 inch thick at certain places in the room, which is going to control the mids and highs, and then do nothing for the low frequency. Suddenly the room has long reverberation at the low frequency and is dead on the high frequency. The whole tonal balance shifts like this, and the room sounds muddy. So don't do that. You have to balance the amount of bass absorption with everything else. You have to have bass absorption.
So you're saying the absorption panels use the thicker ones, which are more full range.
Yeah.
The thinner panels will make the room sound more bass heavy.
What's funny is it won't change. What the thinner ones will do is the result is it'll sound bass heavy. Really what they're doing is they're getting rid of the highs.
Yes.
Which
without
is the same
getting
thing.
rid of the lows.
Right. It's like you have the mixer at the shower. You want it hotter, you can either turn off the heat or turn down the cold. Same result.
But isn't it true that many rooms have more trouble with the bass and less trouble with the mids and
It is
highs?
completely true that most rooms have more problems in the bass than they do in the mids and highs.
So some of us could be happy mostly treating for the bass problem
Yes,
and living with the problems.
to an extent, depending on what the problems are. And there's rooms that have problems in both, problems only in one. You want to look at them all. Because organically the whole thing has to work right. Okay, so first part of my suggested recipe is 20% absorption, 20% diffusion, interleaved. Treat the ceiling and make sure you include bass control in that. So repeat after me. After I said, I will not absorb everything. Really, how many percent of absorption do you want in the room?
20%.
20%. If that's the only thing you remember from this session, along with a trick with one ear, that's great. No more, no less. If you can remember that another 20% of diffusion, that's a good idea. Okay? Now, I'm going to present a suggestion of layout of these materials in the room. Let's say you buy 20% of absorption, 20% of diffusion. Now, where do you put them? Here's, after 30 years of screwing around with this stuff, here's a suggestion that seems to be working repeatedly as we do rooms. This is a view from the top. Same room as I showed before. Our 3 front speakers, 2 side speakers, and 2 back speakers. What I'm suggesting first is to put a few absorber panels on the ceiling in the area between the speakers and the seating position, thereby absorbing the first reflection off the ceiling. I'm also going to suggest to put some diffusion towards the back of the ceiling area, not at the front, but towards the back, so that the sound that passes your ears and goes up there is returned back to you with some scattered energy. So it's essentially misted out, you know, like a mister. So really hot day in Vegas. It's hot. Is it nicer to be hitting the head with a hose going, or is it nicer to have a mist of water? Who votes for mist? Okay, so that mist feels good, and it does also acoustically. So the diffusion up around the back of the room gives you that sense of envelopment and smoothness. Let's look at the left wall. So this is the wall over here. Okay? When you're sitting here looking at the screen, or looking at your two speakers, this is the left wall. Speakers over here. On the left wall, we have an interleaving of absorption and diffusion. These would be 2D diffusers. These would be absorbers. If you took out the diffusers, took everything else out, and put the absorbers you're putting up on the wall into one corner of the room, these 3 absorbers cover this much area. How much is that in percentage of the room? 20. Right? So half of the room is 50, a quarter of the room is 25. That's what we got. It's less than 25. Now when I put them back up on the wall, it looks like a lot. By the time you also add the diffusers and the speakers and all this other stuff. But it's only 20% absorption. That's the left wall. Right wall would be this way. Same kind of thing. Absorber strips throughout the room, interleaved with diffusion. This is what I'm calling 2D diffusion. And what I'm showing here is a semi-cylinder. And towards the front, 2D diffusion. Towards the back, these things that look like skylines or triangles, all kinds of different shapes. That's a 3D diffusion. There again, those absorbers, if you were all to put them on one corner of the room, could correspond to less than 25% of the surface area. Yep?
I have a question. Looking down at your top view, wouldn't that room be sonically lopsided? Because it looks like you have absorption, diffusion in the front on one side and diffusion, absorption on the other.
You are correct, and you are very observant, Ray. It looks... I will introduce this by saying we used to think that the Earth was this flat disk that if you went to the end you would fall over and be eaten by dragons, right?
Yeah.
And then you do. It's happened to me. I got eaten by a dragon. And then we realized by doing some math and by sending a boat over there that hey, you can go all the way around it. Along the way you can find America. So we all used to think that symmetry and how you lay out the walls is extremely important. It turns out it's actually wrong. There's some research by a Greek psychoacoustician. That doesn't mean he's an acoustician gone mad. It means it's a guy who studies the psychology of hearing.
In Greece.
In Greece. In Greece, no less, at the University of Athens, who's been studying the effects of symmetrical versus asymmetrical reflections on sound field. And he's found that human beings hear the intended sound field out of sets of loudspeakers better in reflected fields that are asymmetrical. And the thinking, I don't know how you could ever prove what's going on in the brain, but the thinking is if you take a pair of speakers and you do completely correlated reflections off the left and right walls, where what's coming off the walls is absolutely identical, the brain may actually think that those are intended sounds because they're so correlated. The same way as the pair of speakers is giving you a correlated sound. If the reflections are, the delayed reflections from the walls have a high interaural cross-correlation, is actually what it's called, then your brain's going, well, I hear a sound field and I hear another sound field that's correlated. I don't know. If you break it up very slightly to where you still have reflections, there's delayed reflections that are coming from different places, but they're slightly different, your ear brain can go, those are just reflections, I'll ignore those. That's the prevailing thinking of what's going on. I agree with him. I actually arrived at this accidentally in an installation gone bad where I wasn't paying attention and the technician was putting up the panels, looked at the plan backwards and actually started, the plan called for symmetrical layout, the way it's supposed to be done. And the guy who was installing it was just looking at a wall, just had a cranial rectal inversion and offset everything. Sit down and listen, it's like, wow, that sounds great. My God, this room sounds so, listen to this image, man, I can hear everybody in there, it's beautiful. Wait a minute, you installed the panels wrong. Can you fix this? It's going to sound even better, right? So take all the panels off the clips, put them all back symmetrical, and it's like, oh my God, what just happened? Literally, the sound field fell apart. Went back to asymmetrical, and it was great again. That led me to go do research. Actually, this was long enough ago that you couldn't find everything on the internet. I had to go to the UC Berkeley library to find this document, these series of research documents from Andrei Papadopoulos from the University of Athens. So you're very observant. Most people don't catch that, and it does turn out that asymmetrical placement of treatments on the walls does lead to a better sound field.
Why do you only have 3 bass traps?
Sorry?
Why do you only have 3 bass absorption?
Because there's this thing here called a door, goddammit. So
That's a bad place for the door.
And that actually that
There's no-
bass to bass, does it?
no, there's just nowhere to put a bass trap where that door is.
Oh, I see.
So you're right, we would probably want more bass traps. So what we actually have in this room is a bass trap, an absorber, a filtered absorber that doesn't absorb all the highs, just absorbs lows and lower mids in the corner, making use of a big deep airspace. And in the case of this room, which is actually a real room we did many years ago, we only have room here, here, and here to put it because there was a door. And you're right, that's a bad place for a door, that's just where they put it.
If you have a higher than usual ceiling, is it as advantageous to put the absorption material above the door in the corner? Would that
Yeah,
actually
I mean,
help?
if it, you know, these are all very, let's be, over here you mean?
Yeah.
So this is a very rudimentary setup I'm showing you over here. If the ceiling goes up, of course, you're going to need more absorbers up here because you're trying to still cover 20% of the wall surface. So you have to start to add absorption. So if this room, let's say this ceiling was 9 feet, by the way, in this room. Let's say it was a 12-foot ceiling. What I would end up doing is I may put an absorber over here, an absorber over here, an absorber over here to create an interleave. And I have a picture later of a room like that, where things are starting to checkerboard. That's what sounds the best, is this randomization of absorption and diffusion.
How does the shape of the ceiling affect where you put the diffusion?
Hugely.
So if you had a flat ceiling rather than a coffered ceiling or a sloping, cathedral type ceiling, does that influence the way that you put the diffusion on the walls?
This would be a flat ceiling over here. This is what we would do if the ceiling was actually peaked, sloped on one side, coffered. It would change things quite a bit. I don't unfortunately have time because we got to get done pretty soon. So I'm going to try to blow through this and finish up and take your questions. So this is the back wall. This is the wall behind you. The prevailing thought about the back wall is to absorb the middle part of the back wall. The sounds that pass your head should just be killed, not diffused back. They should just be zapped, because if they do come back and forth in the room, they end up creating a polarization of energy going this way that has a high interaural cross correlation, as in it's hitting your 2 ears at the same time as it's going back, which does this to the sound field. It narrows up the sound field. The more reflections move laterally, the wider the perceived sound field. The more they go front to back, the more it monos up the sound. So what we've gotten into the habit of doing is to, is to absorb the middle of the back wall and put diffusion to the outer parts of the back wall. So sounds that pass your head directly get absorbed. Those that go that way end up finding scattering, so you end up with energy coming back from the room this way, kind of billowing back to you, but with an angle. Starting at about 150 degrees and going down to 90 degrees, you get a better sense of space for two-channel and multi-channel. So let's take a look at what the resulting sound field out of all of this is. I'm going back to that same diagram I've been showing all along. We have a direct sound going from the speaker to the listener, and the reflected sounds that is either absorbed or scattered. Absorbed or scattered. And the scattering produces a re-reflection with smaller vectors. Absorbed, scattered, 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 scattered. This is all the right side, and if you look at the left side, you just get more of this stuff. So my proposed or suggested recipe with 20% absorption, 20% diffusion, interleaved in the room with some bass straps and some ceiling materials, yields a sound field out of the speakers that has a direct sound that's accompanied behind with a diffused reflection. And the perceived effect you get from that is, instead of having this chaotic characters, you get this crescent feel, this croissant, this buttery croissant feeling of energy that's around you, which simulates more like what a concert hall is. In a concert hall, you don't have strong reflections coming from any one place. You get good, long delayed reflections that are scattered by the surfaces. If we go back to that diagram I had a long time ago of this kind of target of sound, what we're looking for is a direct sound with reflected energy that's lower. I don't know if you remember, but what I'm showing here is reflections that are lowered and are scattered through time. These are real measurements of a room done like this. And this type of even reflection, where they're evenly falling down as smooth as possible with a kind of a layout that's as even as possible over time, means good sound. Okay? As in, 9.5 out of 10 human beings placed in a room that has measurements like this, doing all this recipe, will go, I like it. The voices sound good, the imaging sounds good, the bass is good, everything works out well. Okay? So, what's acoustics? It's about the interface between the speaker, the room, and the listener. It's a key product, and if you follow this recipe, you'll end up with things that work very, very well. Let me take 2 seconds here to bypass this, which is the part that, if we had lots of time, I would go through. This is all fun stuff. This is some of the equations you can do to figure out what should be the target reflection decay time. This is my favorite. If you want to know how much reflection energy should be in a room, if you didn't want to follow my 20% recipe, but you wanted to calculate it, you'd calculate this equation across all the frequencies you're interested in. It would take you the better part of an afternoon, and you would look at it in a room and you go, that's about 20%. So if you like math, please do it. So there's a whole discussion here of standing waves, which is an interesting thing, but what I wanted to do is very quickly present what we're doing now to help with a product series to implement this. So we've developed a brand called Dimension 4, in which we have 4 choices of acoustical packages that are called Melody, Concerto, Sonata, and Symphony. These are architecturally driven, which means they look good on the wall. And these are performance driven, which means they don't look so good on the wall, but they work really well. All of them include absorbers, diffusers, bass traps, and ceiling panels. And all of them are available for rooms ranging from 150 square feet to 650 square feet. If you look at the systems, you'll see that recipe. 20% absorption, 20% diffusion, ceiling panels, bass traps, and you'll see some recommended layouts that follow this theory we've developed over years of doing this. Our lowest cost solution, Melody, which is our entry-level architecture-driven thing, looks like this on the wall. These are absorbers. These are diffusers. These strips are actually diffusion strips. There's ceiling panels, there's bass traps. So it's a simplified down version of what I showed you in those diagrams.
What's that called? The Melody system.
Dimension 4 Melody. It's simple, it's cheerful. A system like this for a room around 350 square feet is, I can never remember this. I should remember this. I'll say it's around $2,000 retail. I have a price list over here if you guys want to know. Somewhere around $2,000 retail. It's available in a few colors, it works great.
You sell it individually or as a package? Or?
So this particular one, Melody, is sold as packages. You can't buy the devices individually.
You cannot?
You cannot. This one. So it comes in a box. And interestingly, we Lego block this, where the module is 150 square feet. So 150 square feet is one box, 300 is 2 boxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is what it could look like. This is an installation in Denmark. On the walls, dark gray with black panels. Looks fine. The fit and finish of the panels is very nice. It's not offensive. When people walk into this listening room, they go, yeah, whatever, let's watch a movie. Our next level is Sonata, which is our entry-level performance system, which again means there were no compromises in the design of it, and it looks like crap. So this is what a room looks like with Sonata. Absorbers around the room. Remember this? Does this look familiar?
Yeah.
Diffusers interleave with the absorbers. These are our 2D diffusers. These are our 3D diffusers. Absorbers on the ceiling, diffusers on the ceiling behind the listening position. Bass traps all the way around here. These are the modules. The panels are 2 foot by 4 foot, 2 inch thick of dense rockwool fiberglass. The diffusers are all 2 by 2, and the bass traps are these wedges that go into the corners. There's Just like all the other systems, they go up in 100 square foot increments. They're available in a few different colors. And a typical system for a 350 square foot room costs around $6 grand. It's a little more expensive. This is a layout of a 350 system. This is a layout of a 650 system in a 650 square foot room.
And can they be bought individually again or only?
These can be bought individually. You can buy.
I'll tell you the problem, I can't use any on the ceiling. All of us can't use some of that somewhere.
Correct.
So we don't want to buy the whole thing.
Absolutely.
We can't use it all.
Absolutely. So the idea behind this is we're starting with a guideline. We're saying your room's about 350 square foot. Here's the price you should expect. By the way, this is how we do business. Send us a picture and a plan of the room. Tell us what you need. Oh, looks like you can't put a panel here, can't put a panel there. We'll give you a customized version of this that's going to be close in price, but we're not going to sell you the things you don't need.
Got it.
So this one is purchasable individually. This is an example of a Sonata system in a room in which it was not hidden. This was done in Milano. Over there, they're more, how would I say, risky with their interior designs. But really, it was made to be put in rooms where you're hiding the stuff behind acoustically transparent fabric that's stretched over the materials. Next system up is called Concerto. That's our upscale, architecturally oriented system. This is what it looks like on the walls. It's a little hard to see with these pictures. Anybody turn the lights off for just a second there, John? I think you've got the controls there. I think that's what's going to be about. Let's try it off. Okay, just for a second here. So you will see here carefully that this is an absorber, that's a diffuser, absorber, diffuser, etc., all the way around the room. Concerto is made out of these building blocks of wedge-shaped panels. They're 2x4. That's the absorber, that's the diffuser. When you cover it with fabric, they look just the same. And I'm going to scooch all of this stuff. We have absorbers that are actually helm-holds and tympanic resonators. A gray room would look like this, a blue room would look like this, a red room would look like that. The idea is for the panel to kind of taper down into the wall, disappear into the wall. You match the color to the wall and nobody's offended. This is a listening room up in the San Francisco area. And, you know, most people that walk in this room pay attention to the electronics and the speakers and completely ignore the acoustical treatments on the walls. Our top-of-the-line system is called Symphony. It's the top-of-the-line performance-oriented system. This is a room set up with Symphony. It looks kind of like the Sonata layout, where we have absorbers and diffusers interleaved all the way around the room. Big difference is that all of these materials are actually between 4 and 6 inches thick, and they're all wood. They're beautifully made. They're more expensive. They make a room sound absolutely unbelievable. So the diffusers look, the 3D diffusers look like this. The 2D diffusers look like this. They actually are also base absorbers. This is a showroom in San Jose, California, where we did a scheme of black and gray and wood, and it looks, you know, it doesn't look like somebody's living room for sure. It looks like a nice listening room. This is the other direction, the other direction. The system was originally designed for studio applications. This is a high-end 2-channel listening room we just finished in the Monterey, Carmel area. Here are Magico's complete spectral system and a Symphony package around the room. This brings us back to the question, somebody was asking about a taller ceiling.
Yes.
So this is a room with a much taller ceiling, and we went extra modules up to control the reflections up there, and you'll see that the interleaving starts to crisscross. If I had a lot of time, I'd tell you why we're doing this, but basically...
most of your examples, they have what look to be carpeted floors. Is that something that you recommend?
I don't actually. What I prefer is a floor that's a combination of reflection and absorption. What I prefer, if anybody's building or remodeling or willing to remodel after I'm here, this is the best way to do it. You have a pit in the middle of the area. You have a border of 3 or 4 feet of wood all the way around, and you have a recessed pit in the middle with a really thick underlayment and a thick natural fiber carpet like wool or silk. And you give yourself this much absorption over about 20 to 30% of the middle of the floor. So you have a reflected area and you have an absorptive area in the middle. If you can go the next step, if you can actually dig a pit between the speaker and the listener. So let's say he's the listening position, this is the speaker. Right here, there's going to be a reflection off the floor, very audible. You can hear it by playing big noise and going like this. Make sure people think you're not praying to some strange religion. But if you can actually cut the floor out there and create a pit that's about 6 to 8 inches deep that you stuff with sound absorption, I saw you have a question, and you cover with a bit of a grill and a carpet, now you're going to get rid of the low frequency part of that reflection, and it's unbelievable how much clearer the soundscape is. And on new construction, that's what we do. A concrete floor with a pit, put a little wood subfloor on the top, you have a band all the way around where a carpet is sunken in. In order to look good, you want the pile of the carpet to stick out about a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch over the wood so that it looks in context, and it all works beautifully.
And if you have a suspended floor, which is wood, any different construction.
So I like wood suspended floors as long as they're not super resonant. You know, some of them you go like this and they go boom. That's a problem because they create a sound of their own. But if they're damped a little bit, they also act as a low frequency absorber. So anything that moves in response to bass means you don't have strong bass resonances, which I clearly didn't have time to talk about here very much, but standing wave resonances of the bass really screw things up. We mentioned this, and we got to control them, and having some flex to the walls is the way to do it. Let me finish this and I'll take the last few questions. So speaking of low frequency resonances, we've developed this product called the Spring Trap, which is a really crazy gizmo that's made up, it's a triangular box that is, it's 46 inches tall, 18, and if you cut it in two, you'll actually see a suspended front panel that's surrounded by a butyl rubber gasket, just like a woofer. And inside it's mounted on 6 precision springs. This panel moves with a 60 Hz central resonance in response to low frequency energy, and it displaces air molecules inside a resonating volume here. This is a Helmholtz resonator with 1 port, a second Helmholtz resonator, and a third Helmholtz resonator. What we have is essentially a box with 3 bass absorbers through what's called Helmholtz resonance that's actuated by a very big sail. So think of it as a sailboat, as a really fast sailboat, like one of those America's Cup catamarans, where we're collecting a lot of sound pressure in a big panel and shoving it down into a funnel that's got 3 small Helmholtz resonators. We're actually multiplying the effect of the Helmholtz resonator by a factor of 10 by putting it in the corner and having a big panel, and you get a very good low frequency absorber out of this thing. This is the absorption curve. Okay, oh my God, it's already there. You typically put it in the corner of a room, like this or like this, and if you want, you can use that as a plant stand.
How high is it?
46 inches.
Do you ever put one on top of the other and run it all the way up to the ceiling?
The reason we didn't make it 48 inches, we made it 46 inches, so you can put 2 of them on top of each other and figure it out.
So that's a good idea.
That's a good idea. Sometimes we have a good idea. Final thing is we have this product, or this group of products called the Audiophile First Aid Kit, which looks like this. It's actually a package of 2 of our spring traps and 6 of our diffusers, all in one package, that solve the most egregious problems you brought up with most rooms. I said, hold off on that thought. You take a perfectly good pair of speakers and put them in a room. First thing that's going to happen is the bass is going to suck. Second thing is that the sound field is going to get constricted. You need some diffusion, you need a bit of absorption, and you need some bass treatment. That's what this does.
How much is it?
This is around $3,500 retail. Audiophile First Aid Kit. I am done. I am out of here. I will take questions outside in 11 minutes. People, let's get out of here.
Thank you.